Hi, welcome everyone to this evening's event. I am Scott Edgar. I'm the Assistant Arts and Cultural Programmer at Belfast Lennon Hall Library. For those of you unfamiliar with the library, we're the oldest such institution in Belfast and the only library in Ireland that generates a proportion of our income from our membership. If you enjoy this evening's event, please visit our website and find out more about how you can become a member. For now, I'll keep everyone in attendance on mute. If you've got any questions or comments throughout the evening, please type them in the chat box and we'll get back to them at the end if time permits. On this day, 100 years ago, 25th of August, 1921, Brian Moore was born at the family home on Clifton Street in North Belfast. Family legend states that gunshots could be heard in the background. His father, James, was a surgeon in the city, and his uncle, Owen McNeill, was a founder of the Gaelic League, and as chief of staff of the Irish Volunteers, attempted to put a stop to the Easter Rising of 1916. Brian would become one of Northern Ireland's greatest novelists, despite failing his exams at St Malachy's College. His first novel, The Lonely Passion of Judith Hearne, came in 1955, and another 19 followed. There's much to be said about his life and work, his service in air raid precautions units and overseas during the Second World War, and his life in Canada after departing Northern Ireland in the late 1940s. Generations of Irish writers have risen to prominence since, inspired by his work, including Seamus Heaney, Brian Friel, and contemporary authors such as Lucy Caldwell and Jan Carson. This evening, we will be joined by filmmaker Brian Henry Martin and actor and director Dan Gordon, who'll be taking a look at the cinematic passion of Brian Moore, looking at films such as Torn Curtain and, well, before I run the risk of spoilers, I'll hand over to Brian and Dan.
Thank you, Scott, and good evening, everybody. It's such an honor to be looking at the film work of Brian Moore on this momentous day, the centenary of his birth. And I'm such a big fan of his novels and have been a passionate reader of Brian Moore for many, many years. But I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Mr. Dan Gordon. And Dan, we are going to discuss the film career of Brian Moore. So Dan, I mean, I think when you look at his career on screen, I mean, there's 20 plus films. When you look at the actors who've appeared in those films, you know, everyone from Paul Newman, Michael Caine, Julie Andrews, Tilda Swinton, some great directors. I mean, how do you look, you know, just broadly at his work on the big screen? Oh, Dan, you'll have to unmute yourself.
I beg your pardon, I didn't realize I'd been muted there. Apologies. Good evening, everybody. Yes, Moore, I mean, first and foremost, he is a novelist. He wanted to be known as a writer. He said on a BBC Northern Ireland interview a lot of years back that people seem to be more interested in the personality than the content of what they write. And he wanted to be known for his writing. He thought he wasn't interesting enough or had lived a colourful enough life. But first and foremost, I think he is and was a novelist. The screenwriting thing, as you know, Brian, is very, very different. A completely different skill and style. And it's very hard to cross over, I think, between novel writing and writing screenplays, and even playwriting as well. I should also mention the name Brian, which probably people know, but it wasn't any kind of affectation. His father, his name was James Bernard Moore. He was 50 years of age when he started a family. He was a surgeon in the Mater Hospital. But curiously, like most Irish families, they would give a child a name and then they'd call them something else. His father was known as Brian in the house, and he was known as Uncle Brian by his nieces and nephews. So there was a certain level of confusion. So Brian Moore Jr., rather than Brian Og, he was known as Brian. And that's where the name comes from. That's one of the first things that struck me about him. But in the context of films, I mean, I say this at the start, I say it at the end, I think he was very much ahead of his time. He was producing material in his novels that really challenged. I mean, his book and books were banned in Ireland at times, and his films were risque in some respect and challenged a lot of authority. And that was one thing that he was, his themes throughout his books and throughout his life were challenges to abuse of authority, challenges to religion. Religion played a very big part in his life as a child, as a young man. I mean, he grew up facing the Orange Hall. His family home was across the road from the Orange Hall in Clifton Street, just below Carlisle Circus, and his bedroom looked out at King Billy on top of the horses. I think it's the biggest Orange Hall in Ireland, and certainly the only one with a big King Billy on top of it. And it was outside every 12th of July. The Orangemen used to mass. Maybe that's not a good, that's not a good name, but they would turn up in their crowds, and he's looking out there thinking, my goodness, they're out to get me, and they're playing their drums. So, I mean, coming from the background that he came from and having a difficult time in education in Belfast at St. Malachy's, which was just up the road, St. Patrick's Church, which he wasn't keen on, was just down the road, and the hospital where he should have become a doctor like his father, up the road as well. And he didn't succeed with any of those things because he failed mathematics in St. Malachy's. And probably a lot of the folk watching will be aware of this, that he didn't go to university. He joined the area precautions during the war, and then he joined the Ministry of Transport. Then he left to work for the Ministry of Transport in Europe, came back, and then emigrated to Canada when he followed a woman out there, an older woman. And then he started his kind of odyssey from there, ending up in where he ended up. But his film, I think, just ahead of his time, like his.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I've always found curious is that he was living in Mailbu, and I mean, this seemed extraordinary to me, because you always think of novelists, they live in Paris or New York, at least. And Moore had lived in New York, but obviously then he went to live in Mailbu. And Mailbu, of course, is the home of film stars. It's where movie stars live. So it feels more like a screenwriter would be living in Mailbu.
Well, he went to Mailbu when he was doing Torn Curtain for Hitchcock. But he has said on a number of occasions that he didn't want to be part of that literary society in Paris and New York. He was very aware that living in Mailbu, and Pat O'Connor, I did make a documentary about Brian Moore back in 2004-04. Pat O'Connor, the director, the Irish director, he said, he was a friend of Moore's, and he said that, if you want to be part of that elite and be well known as a writer and become a personality and go to all those parties, you don't live in Mailbu. I mean, Brian Moore says, we were 4 miles from the nearest shop. And his wife, Jean, it was a garage, I think, as well, lived together. She describes them, they were like monks, which is interesting kind of metaphor. And she was the cook and support monk, and he was the writer monk. And they had a very successful and a very special partnership together, and they did live in isolation in Mailbu, so it wasn't that life. And he taught at the university in Los Angeles, I think, as well, a lot of the time, but he wasn't moving in those circles. He wasn't moving with the movie people.
Okay, well, look, we're going to very shortly see a very special clip, but what I would like to do tonight for us while we're chatting about this is for us to consider what we think is the best Moore film on screen. Now, that may be a film that he wrote the screenplay of, or it was adapted from one of his books. But if we were to recommend just one Brian Moore film, which one would it be? So let's consider that. And secondly, which book should be adapted for the big screen? Which of Moore's many novels that have not do we think should be? And we can consider that as we go along. Now, I'm going to attempt to screen share here, Dan. This is all going to get very technical. Okay, can we see this? Is this working? Yes. Okay, so now, Dan, this is when you went to Brian Moore's house in Mailbu back in 2003. What was tell us about what your sense of going to the Mailbu house was. Before we see it, what were you thinking when you were on your way to that house?
Well, like yourself, when somebody mentions Mailbu, that's a kind of the oasis, the magic word of Hollywood and the elite. I mean, if you have a place in Mailbu, you must be exceptionally wealthy, and you own a jet and you have a big swimming pool and you have acres of land and a golf course on it. I was surprised actually when I got there, because it's the desert. Coming down from the mountains and the canyons. It is a beautiful place. The ocean, the Pacific there, it shelves away immediately. It was the water was full of kite surfers and surfers, and I could also see why sharks eat them, because they all look like seals in their wetsuits. And they were splashing about in this very rough water. But it was a beautiful place. And
okay, well, let's see if we can see it this time, Dan. Let's have a look and see if it's going to work.
Jean,
very good to see you.
Lovely to be here. Just through here.
Right through.
Well, I see you have.
We're right on the ocean. You see.
And you own one or two books as well.
A few books, yes.
Oh my goodness! Look at that.
To keep us occupied. Yeah.
Fabulous.
Yes. So this is a big surfing beach. Come out and see the ocean a little closer.
Yes, I've seen pictures and footage of Brian out here.
Yes.
Spending time.
Yes. He liked this very much and spent.
He was really drawn to the ocean, wasn't he?
Indeed. Yeah. For Brian, the summers in Donegal and the summers when they went to Port Stewart, this was a reproducing summer holiday, and I think that's what attracted him.
Absolutely beautiful.
It is lovely, isn't it? This time of night.
Was Brian's work associated with this side of the country at all?
Well, that was the time when he reluctantly came to do the film script for Alfred Hitchcock.
That was Torn Curtain?
Torn Curtain, yes, And Hitchcock tried to tempt him to stay on and write 3 more films.
Why did Brian turn down Hitchcock?
Brian didn't want to be a screenwriter. He was a novelist and he wanted to continue with novels. He liked occasionally to do it for a diversion from novel writing, and of course it made money.
And it made money. So Dan, I mean, that's a very revealing comment there from Jean, of course, Brian's second wife, who you met in the house.
Yep.
And there she is telling us that he wants to be a novelist, and he reluctantly came to work with Alfred Hitchcock. I mean, it seems incredible.
Yes, I mean, it surprised me that he would turn down Hitchcock. But again, it's the singularity of his mindset of wishing to be a novelist and knowing his kind of place in the world and what he wanted to be and do. And you say his second wife, that's his second wife of 37 years, I think. A magnificent woman. She was, when I met her, I should say, I actually felt she seemed like part of her was missing. Brian had died in 1999, and still in 2003, you could see the gap in her existence. And she was moving on with her life, but you could see that there was a big part of her missing. She was such an intrinsic support to him. And they knew each other so well. The house itself was actually quite a modest wooden structure, and it had been extended. But the surroundings and the location, and what I thought was fantastic, personal detail, they had bathrooms each off the bed. They both had their own bathrooms. I thought that is the way to live, and dressing rooms. And the extraordinarily hospitable woman. And I got to meet Brian's son, Michael, a lovely, lovely bloke, very well adjusted in the world. But Brian was strong enough willed. I mean, he didn't go on writing screenplays for Hitchcock. I think Hitchcock wanted another 3. I mean, Torn Curtain, when we'll come to talk about it, I think it made $13 million, you know, and it cost $3 million to make, so they did all right with that. And you know, Brian obviously was doing something right.
Yeah, so let's have a look at this film, Torn Curtain. It's from 1966. It's a spy drama, obviously directed by Alfred Hitchcock and starring probably the two biggest film stars in the world at the time. So let me just go to this, and hopefully now, Dan, everything is going to work like a...
Torn Curtain. Paul Newman is defecting. Julie Andrews is trying to stop him.
You stay away from me. Don't talk to me. When this plane lands, you take the next one out. Anywhere. Go home.
But is Newman really joining the other side? Or is he merely part of the most fantastic espionage plot of the Cold War? Their only chance to escape. Maybe no chance at all. Torn Curtain.
I think Paul Newman and Julie Andrews wasn't the first choice for Hitchcock, and he actually wanted other actors, and the studios kind of forced them upon him because she'd done Sound of Music and Mary Poppins, and Paul Newman was Paul Newman, and so it wasn't a kind of initially a happy kind of meeting of folk, you know. And also on that, on Torn Curtain, Waterhouse and Hall, Keith Waterhouse and Willis Hall were brought in to do rewrites. And in the end, I think that there was a bit of a kerfuffle, and there might have been even court proceedings, but Brian Moore got the credit as the writer. And it's symptomatic, I think, and you'll know this better than me, Brian, that in Hollywood, the writer, and Brian Moore said this himself, that it was the bottom of the pile. And, you know, people will be changing stuff as you go along, and you don't get a vote, they don't want you around on set. And I think that possibly that wasn't the best introduction to the major movies for him, you know. And that,
how successful do we think this film is? I mean, Hitchcock wanted to make a film about the Cambridge spies. Yeah. And, you know, and so this had been, you know, in his thinking for many years. And by the time this film kind of comes out, like the kind of John le Carre spy novels have arrived, and The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, and this feels slightly dated by the time it comes out. Now, there is one extraordinary scene in it, and that is the killing of a man in this is really very memorable for, you know, just...
yeah.
You know, it's an extraordinary, because Hitchcock wanted to show that it was actually very difficult to kill a person, unlike in most other movies. So it takes a very long time for this to happen. It's an extraordinary scene. But I mean, what an introduction to the movies, to work with one of the greatest film directors ever, and then to turn him down and to go back to writing novels again. It's quite incredible.
Yeah, I mean, just the dramatic strength of that scene that you're talking about, where they Paul Newman, they have a chaperone who has been following Paul Newman around. Paul Newman is pretending to defect to get to find out about what the Russians ultimately would know through East Germany about a missile system. And Julie Andrews follows him out. I think it's a bit like McLean or Burgess, one of those guys. Their wives had followed them out, and Hitchcock was keen to investigate that, what would happen. So he pretends to defect, and he's being followed around by a chaperone who realizes that he's up to no good, and they have no choice but to kill him. And initially they begin to strangle him, and then the farmer's wife that he's meeting is undercover. She stabs him, and then they drag him to a cooker, and a gas cooker, turn the gas on and stick his head in the oven. And that idea of being able to make it very difficult to actually kill someone is really extraordinary in its depth and understanding of making films, and, you know, what is to come. Because at that stage, everybody who gets hit on the head by a cowboy gun just gets knocked out, where instead of going, that was really sore, what did you do that for? I think that was particularly brilliant. But there are other lovely elements in Torn Curtain. The Polish countess, she's a refugee and she's trying to get back to get to the West, and she wants them to be her sponsor.
Yeah,
and
very emotional scene. Yeah.
You know, again, it's an understanding of the fragility of human condition, and much bigger themes are being looked at, I think, within that, for just a spy thriller.
Now, Brian Moore's first introduction to the big screen was a film called Intent to Kill back in 1958, directed by Jack Cardiff on one of his crime novels. It was a kind of a B picture in a way, but it was set in Montreal. And that's when he would really make his mark in cinema, 2 years before Torn Curtain, with The Luck of Ginger Coffey. Now, just before we have a look at a clip from the film, which is obviously from a newspaper office, just give us a sense, Dan, of how close this was to Brian Moore's life itself.
Yeah, well, Alan Bennett, the writer, says that as a writer, your life is your bank balance. It's the source material, and skillful writers create an alter ego which act for them in their books. Bennett says he was never really able to do that, but Brian Moore, on the other hand, is very quick to admit with supreme confidence in his own intuition and his skill as a novelist that his leading characters are variants of himself, even women and priests. In this case, Moore had gone to Montreal, he'd gone to Canada following out an older woman who he was in love with. He'd tried to rekindle an affair and she didn't want to know. And he was there penniless. And he got out on assisted travel. He didn't have the money to come home. So he got himself a job as a proofreader with the Montreal Gazette and got his introduction into the world of newspapers, which he then became a features reporter for a number of years. And that was, again, starting to stabilize his ability to write and teach him technique and teach him about deadlines and headlines and content, even though it was factual. So it's the penniless character that is portrayed, the kind of it'll be grand attitude of Irishness. There's a little bit of, sure, we'll take the chance. It's there. Moore grew up with it. He knew people like that, and he extended on from that.
Okay, well, look, let's have a look from let's have a look at a clip from Ginger Coffey.
What's your schooling? Oh, well, sir, I went to Dublin to the university to take an arts degree. Then I was in the army, sir. After that, it was public relations.
Public relations? You know what that is? That's pulling the wool over the public's eyes.
That's very good, sir. I must bear that one in mind.
What else did you do?
I took journalism.
What paper?
Yes. Irish Times.
Good paper?
Yes.
How long were you there?
About 5 years.
I knew it. Told you to be coming in.
That's right, Mr. Mack.
Why did you come to Canada?
Oh, I came out here as a public relations man representing an Irish firm.
What sort of firm?
Whiskey.
Scotch whiskey?
No Irish, sir.
No wonder you're out of a job, then. Did you work on the foreign desk at the Times?
Oh, on the foreign desk, yes. I was there, sir, yes.
Look at that. Waste of good money paying these loafers. Get me Ted Malani. When did you say you worked there?
About 2 years ago there, sir.
Ted, when you worked in the Irish Times, did you ever hear of a sub-editor named of, what's your name?
Coffey, sir.
Coffey, about 2 years ago. Wait a minute. What was the name of the foreign editor in your day?
I'm afraid I can't remember, sir.
Okay, Ted. Doesn't matter. If you'd been a Scotch, you'd have come in here with your references in your hand. But you carry nothing but that silly hat and a lot of cheek. Let me tell you, laddie, there isn't an Irishman born could pull the wool over my eyes.
I have to apologize for taking up your time.
Are you hard up for a job? Tell the truth now. Spell me parallel.
Now, Dan, spell me parallel. Can you spell parallel?
I'm not even going to attempt it because
now this I think is a brilliant film. It's highly regarded in Canada. It was shot on location in Montreal, so it really captures that city fantastically well. It's got such humor and tone and tragedy in it. And Robert Shaw and Mary Ure play the couple, Count Ginger and his wife. And they were married in real life. And it's a really compelling portrayal of a married couple. They are fantastic in this film. Dan, what's your sense of it?
Well, again, I mean, the brilliance of the casting of that couple, as they were, they'd worked on stage together. Mary Ure was married to John Osborne, the playwright, and they had a son. And it was later really thought that the father of the son was actually Robert Shaw, because she was having an affair with him, and they were appearing on stage together at the time. And then they subsequently married after she divorced from John Osborne. I think you're hitting the nail on the head. The fact that they have that shorthand as a couple, again, this investigation of a relationship where there's a feckless kind of husband who can't quite settle in a job. It's almost like Juno and the Paycock. And the Juno relationship with Captain Boyle, everything will be grand, sure we'll get on and we'll find something better, and actually I don't want to do that job because I don't like doing it. And by the end of the book and by the end of the film, he kind of goes, well, maybe I will go and do that other job then that I could possibly do, when he used to work for the diaper company. But I mean, again, a very strong Irish actor, Liam Redmond there playing the editor. He's an Irishman playing a Scotsman, extraordinarily. But again, a very accomplished character actor. And, years ahead of, talking about PR as being pulling the wool over the public's eyes, 1960 wrote that, 60 years ago. We're only just figuring that out still with social media. And, so I think a very strong performance, as you say. It's not the most dramatic of stories. It's about a family disintegrating. There's a daughter, a teenage daughter, who's having to cope with the parents separating and living in different locations with them, living with her father, living with her mother, and then she brings boys into the home and stuff when she's with her father, and the father can't cope. So very insightful as well.
But it's very compelling, and of course, Brian Moore wrote the screenplay for that as well. So, he actually did the adaptation from his own novel. And I think that is why it's so strong. Now, we're going to move on to another film which Brian Moore wrote the screenplay for, based from one of his novels. But before we do leave kind of Ginger Coffey and move to Catholics, there's a Star Wars connection here between these two. Inexplicably, Dan, tell us about that.
Well, yeah, Irvin Kershner, who directed it.
Directed Ginger Coffey, yeah?
He directed Ginger Coffey. He would go on to direct The Empire Strikes Back.
I'm your father.
Yes, I'm your father in that franchise. And when we get to Catholics, which Brian wrote, it's set on a remote Irish island, which could very well be Skellig. And the Star Wars franchise recently then decided to settle on Skellig and shoot part of the latest trilogy there. So there's a kind of curious connection there throughout. That's that thing that happens in the world, just that queer coincidences. But yeah, Kershner, he also directed Never Say Never Again with Sean Connery, part of the Bond sort of breakaway, and RoboCop 2.
Very important film. Well, let's have a look at Catholics, which is from 1973. It was made for television, but then did get a cinema release, starring Trevor Hard and Martin Sheen, based on Brian's 1972 novel.
While you're trying to set it up, I mean, this actually had several names, this film. It was called Conflict. It was called The Conflict. It was called A Fable of the Future. It was also called The Visitor. And it's about faith and the loss of faith and invented Vatican councils. It's set kind of in 2000. It was written in the 90s. People aren't quite sure, but it's set ahead of, it's a fourth Vatican council. I think there's only ever been two. And it's kind of dealing with the loss of faith because of the changes in the demands from the Catholic Church, and bringing guitars in and changing the mass from Latin. And it's an investigation of that. Interestingly, there's also a missing cut, a missing scene. The Pope, he's referred to as the Holy Father, I think, in it, or something like that. I'll find it in a second. But there was a scene shot with the Pope, Rafe Vallone, who appears in Godfather 3, playing the Pope, and it's been cut out of a lot of the versions. And he no longer appears in it, but it's all exclusively, I think, set on the island, just between Trevor Howard, the monks, and there's a lot of Irish actors there, really famous, well-established old Irish actors like Godfrey Quigley, Tom Jordan, who ran the Lyric in Belfast briefly, a young Michael Gambon, Cyril Cusack, and they're all in there as part of it. I think we're maybe ready to run VT.
On earth.
Father Abbot, what is your decision about the continuance of the Latin Mass on Mailbu?
I have been informed by Robe that the Mass is now to be regarded as a symbolic ritual. Donald.
It's blasphemy!
No, Donald, no, you're not well. You're not
sacrilege! I can't be hearing
Take
it!
control of yourself.
I will not be ordered to believe something which I do not believe.
Times have changed.
Yes, they have. And you and the likes of you are destroying the church.
Those who trespass against us.
I want this settled by the end of the week.
Yes, sir.
Get that old fool down off that mountain, James. And if he gives you any trouble, bite him.
Now, obviously, faith and tests of faith and is a big part of Brian's work, Dan, and this, and, we're going to look at Black Robe next. And so talk to us about that. I mean, because you investigated that in your documentary, you went back to that area of his life. How impactful was kind of religion on his writing?
He couldn't leave it alone. I mean, his sister, one of his sisters, she became Sister Anne. She was a nun. And his mother, Eileen, was, I think it was Eileen McFadden. She was one of 19 children. And his mother was born in Donegal to quite a poor family. And the children were all farmed out. And his mother was raised by an uncle who was a priest. So there was a very heavy influence on him all his life. When he wrote anything slightly racy and his mother read it, she would say to him, yeah, I didn't really like that bit, and I don't think you should be saying that. And when he criticized the church, she wasn't comfortable with it. But it was, when I spoke to his sister Eilish about his faith and so on. I mean, she talked about how he disliked St. Malachy's. He didn't like the general holiness of the place and the fact that they beat you. He described it as they beat you. And he resented that. He also didn't succeed in maths, I think I said, and failed his junior cert there. So that was our senior cert, that was a big problem for him. And the education and the religion all kind of combined. And he struggled with it all his life. And Ellie said a strange thing to me. She said, I don't think if he was on his deathbed, I think he would return to the church. I'm not so sure from his writings and the way he would pull things up. Even within Black Robe, Trevor Howard, as the abbot, actually mentions the abuse of children. And again, that was back in 1990. And I think it was physical abuse, perhaps he was talking about, but at the same time, there was an undercurrent there within Moore's writing. And I think Moore, the abuse of power is the way he viewed a lot of the church, the ability to believe and have faith or just live a life. Again, in something like we'll get the Black Robe, does it warrant what the Indians do and their worship of nature? the worship of Catholicism or Western religions? Is it the same kind of version of a magic show? So he struggled constantly throughout his work and throughout his life, and his books are the theme of religion and faith and loss of faith are right throughout them. Black Robe is it's 1991 historical drama. It was a 1985 book, and it's basically it was directed by Pierre Brassard, who did Driving Miss Daisy, and it's set in the 17th century and depicts the adventures of a Jesuit missionary tasked with founding a mission in northern Canada, and he's having to negotiate with the various Indian tribes that are there. Algonquins are the tribes that he's kind of alongside of, but they have enemies as like the Hurons who are trying to kill them. So it's to do with that, again, to do with faith and loss of faith. Have you squared it up?
Very soon. I hope so. So let me just see.
It was Pierre Brassard had done Driving Miss Daisy, so Dances with Wolves had happened, and he thought on the back of that, he got the backing with that and Driving Miss Daisy. He got the backing from the studios to make Black Robe. He had wanted to do it for a long time. It came out in '85, and he did it in 1991, and this is it.
North America, in the early 17th century. The New World, where men believed the forest spoke and the dead talked at night.
I commend to your care Father Lafort. Love and honor him. Guard him well.
I'm afraid of this country. The devil rules here.
A river journey of 1,500 miles. A hostile land. A hostile people.
Tell me, Black Robe, what does your dream say now?
Why do you want to accompany Father Laforgue?
For the greater glory of God.
In a land at the edge of the world, a story of love, faith,
When I die, Jimmy, now we'll go to paradise. Let me baptize you and you will go there also.
and loss of faith.
Help me.
Black Robe,
What can we say to people who think their dreams are the real world? This one is an illusion.
I would jog, Michimindo, Black Robe.
I mean, I have to say, Dan, I think that's an extraordinary film. You know, it would have been the first film of Brian Moore's that I seen in the cinema. And as you said, it came at a time in between The Mission and Dances with Wolves and you know, and there was something happening with, you know, Native Americans and indigenous peoples of North America. And this film is subtitled, and, you know, and there's a real kind of dignity to the portrayal in this film, and it's haunting and it's savage landscape, and, you know, there's some brutal scenes in it, but it's an absolutely stunning film. And Brian, of course, was the executive producer and the screenwriter of this film.
Yes, it's it's respectful to the indigenous people. I love in the subtitles when there's 4 or 5 languages. There's English and Cree and Mohawk and Algonquin and I think French. And when they're talking about the French, the hairy faces, the Black Robes, they laugh at them. They think they're stupid. And, you know, they're not very bright. They're baptizing people, and they're baptizing children who then subsequently die because there's a high infant mortality rate. So the Indians are associating the baptisms with death. And again, ahead of his time in the investigation of the destruction of native peoples and destruction of their culture and the ignorance with which Westerners civilize other societies. Extraordinarily within it, I love all the little kind of interconnections, but one of the actors you saw there is Raoul Trujillo. He plays Cositan, I think. He's the sort of the head of the Hurons, and he does some very nasty things to the to Black Robe and the Indians that he comes with. But he is in Mel Gibson's 2006 film Apocalypto, which was made in the Mayan language, or ostensibly Mayan language, about the conquistadors coming and the Incas and the deaths of the civilizations there. And it basically it's Rambo in Mayan. I feel when I compare the two films, also the Revenant, which Tarantino made with Leonardo DiCaprio, I think they were influenced by Black Robe. I think Black Robe is 10, 20 years ahead of its time. Again, trying to use the indigenous languages, shooting on location. You saw the breath of the actors there. That was free. That wasn't pretend. That was real winter in Canada, in the Northern Territories. And it did very well, as you say, in Canada. It made $500,000, I think, in the first few weeks of it opening, and was one of the biggest grossing films that did so in Canada. It's very highly thought of.
Now we come to Brian Moore's first novel, The Lonely Passion of Judith Hearne, which was obviously published in 1955, and there would eventually be a film made in 1987. Now, in those 30 years, there had been so many different versions of this film that could have been made. I mean, every actress was at one time or another considered for this role. Brian himself wrote a screenplay. Brian Friel wrote a screenplay. Katharine Hepburn was talked about to play Judith Hearne. I mean, there were some extraordinary things. And Irvin Kershner there, who we talked about in terms of Ginger Coffey, actually came to Belfast and, kind of location scouted, potentially shooting in Belfast. Now, the film that did happen in 1987 starred, of course, Maggie Smith and Bob Hoskins, but with one major change. So tell us about that, Dan, and how do you think that affects the film?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was directed by Jack Clayton, who had done A Room at the Top with Lawrence Harvey and The Innocents and The Great Gatsby. That was Robert Redford, Mia Farrow. But they moved the location from Belfast to Dublin. Now, it was 1987. Belfast was not a place where you could run about filming. It wasn't really a place you could do very much safely. So you can understand why they did it, but it took a great lump out of the book. It took the character of the industrial city of Belfast from this overshadowing and took it to a Georgian, more cosmopolitan city, even though they did show it as run down in places and that under life. But there was an element lost, I think, because of that. Having said that, two marvelous performances, winning BAFTA for both Maggie Smith and for Bob Hoskins, as this eponymous Judith Hearne, who was based on a woman who used to visit the Moores at their home in Clifton Street, called Mary Judith Keogh, who was an elderly, well, not an elderly, she was an older woman, and in those days that damning term of a spinster, a lonely woman who would have a sherry. And it was quite funny when I interviewed Brian's sisters. They said, oh, she would come, but she never drank. And then she would have the sherry, just to suit. And I thought, she never drank, but she had a sherry. Right, okay, that's a different kind of qualification of the thing. But a brilliant...
I'm going to see if we can see a clip here, and if not, we'll move on. But let's see if we can see a clip of Maggie Smith, the great Maggie Smith, and Bob Hoskins in action in Brian's finest novel. Let's have a look.
And I've been waiting for you. Years I've been waiting. Years, every one of the 12 months. Praying for it, hoping. A woman never gives up her hopes. There's always a Mr. Right, they say. Changing as the years go by. Well, you know, he's tall, dark, and handsome in the beginning, and then, well, you're not so young, and he's middle-aged and funny-looking, and common as dirt. And drat anybody, and anybody so much as gives you a kind word. And that's your prince. Sent to keep you from being alone. And love, that's forgotten. You're just supposed to take him even though you know he doesn't want you. All he wants is an American quick lunch.
But Judy, we do have things in common. You're a fine woman.
Do you see me as a woman, Jim?
Why, sure. At least we're doing something together. Together something.
So's alone. Doesn't mean you're nobody. You don't exist.
Now, as we all know, I mean, the book is a masterpiece, and it's just devastating, heartbreaking, emotional. And I think the sadness for us looking at Brian Moore's films, Dan, and already we're getting that sense of this really eclectic career on the big screen. But Belfast is missing. There is no Belfast in the Brian Moore cinema canon. And of all films, along comes Judith Hearne, and you think, surely to God, and it's not, of course. And that scene that we saw there was from towards the end of the film, and they did change the ending of the novel to make it more of a happier ending. Now, you know the pressure there is in films and movies, Dan, to have a happy ending, and what's your feeling about that?
Yeah, it's funny, when I did the documentary, it was in London to interview some of the folk, and I met an old friend that had acted with Michael Grandage, and he had Tom Stoppard with him, the playwright. And so I got to say hello to Tom Stoppard, which was an extraordinary moment in my life. But Tom Stoppard, in the Shakespeare in Love film, he wrote, "What the people want is comedy, love, and a bit with the dog. Give them what they want." I think there's an element of that with the film, that the book itself is too difficult for the cinema goer to handle, to leave the cinema having had their popcorn and invested time in characters, to see it end badly. So they felt, I think, they had to inject some kind of hope. And again, it would have been probably by committee too. Patricia Craig, who's one of the biographers, probably the leading biographer on Brian Moore, said Judith Hearne was the quintessential Belfast novel, and that's what made it so successful. But at the same time, I think there would be too much Belfast if it had ended as badly as it did in the book for the film. So that's why I think they veered away from it, because of the Hollywood kind of influence. And amazingly, the box office listed for it made £112,190 for box office, which is a tiny amount of money for a movie, especially one in 1987. So, they were doing their best. And another thing about Brian Moore is it said that he never wrote the same book twice. The books are so varied, so different. I think it makes him a very obvious Ulsterman in that way. Frank Carson, I did a thing recently, I wrote a play about Frank Carson, and he was like the comedians that, you don't like that joke, here's another one you might like. Here's another one you might like. And also, Moore was challenging himself. I mean, it may be a bit facetious to say that he was doing different books because he couldn't settle on one. He could have stuck with one genre and just kept it, but he was trying and challenging. He was writing stuff about the past, the future, about ghosts. The canon of work is incredible, and I think if he was around writing today and doing the same stuff, I think they would all become movies, and I think they would all be out there making a lot of money.
Well, Dan, we're coming to the end of our time, but there's one last clip that I want to look at, and this is the last film of Brian Moore's work, to be made in 2003. It's called The Statement, directed by Norman Jewison, starring Michael Caine. So I'm gonna see if I can pull this up here, Dan, on a very smooth way.
Oh.
Anyway, Dan, you did actually meet Norman Jewison, who's an extraordinary character. I mean, he goes down in film history for that incredible close-up scene in the Thomas Crown affair that we all remember, with Steve McQueen and Faye Dunaway. But tell us about meeting Norman Jewison and what he felt about Brian Moore.
Norman Jewison was besotted with Brian Moore. He thought he was a brilliant storyteller. He loved the fact that Brian Moore, in the statement, is wishing will have an anti-hero as the main character. Pierre Broussard, played by Michael Caine, is a Vichy French collaborator who has been hiding out in with the church in priories throughout France after the war. It's based on several versions of things that had happened. There were seven Jews murdered in a reprisal killing in 1944 by a guy who was the first Frenchman who was then prosecuted for crimes against humanity in the 80s and 90s. And also in France, there was a count from France had turned up, and he had done a similar he had done the hiding around the priories, and the French government tried to prosecute him. And there was a campaign in Canada, and he was able to avoid prosecution. He was able to get pardons. He was able to sneak off to Bolivia. And Brian Moore decided to have a go at tackling this, because after the war, so many people escaped justice. And Jewison was intrigued by this willingness on Brian Moore's part to say the unsayable, to tackle the unsavory side of public society that allowed people to live within it, and the church particularly protecting these folk that were managing to hide away. So it was the hypocrisy and the French government and the collaboration. Norman Jewison, he was Oscar nominated for Heat of the Night, Fiddler on the Roof, and Moonstruck.
Sorry, I've broken down. If you're going up to the Abbey, could you give me a lift?
In 1945, Pierre Broussard was arrested by the police in Paris, tried as a collaborator, and sentenced to death.
This is the only photograph of him that we know exists.
A week later, he escapes, and now he's been charged with crimes against humanity.
I have to confess, I've killed a man.
He's old, but he's a fox. He knows how to go to ground. If he gets your scent, he'll disappear. That mustn't happen.
I want to know how it's possible for a man to survive on the run for 40 years.
The church, contrary to popular belief, is not a monolithic organization.
God is good. I was followed. A man tried to kill me. I had to defend myself.
Your friend is in great danger. If we don't find him, he'll be executed. The church has a long history of secrecy.
They protect someone like Broussard.
They're searching for me.
I want you to know that we pray for you every night.
If our friend is caught, everything will come out.
Someone must be tipping him off.
Someone high up, honored, respectable.
Like many young men of his generation, made a serious mistake.
I want you to leave.
You're my wife. I have a right to be here.
You betray everything. You betray everybody.
Do you know that withholding information is a criminal offense?
Then arrest me.
Our enemies are closing in on me. They're everywhere.
You can't simply disappear.
You will be destroyed.
I'll risk it.
I'm warning you.
Unless the whole truth is brought out into the open, the dead will never rest easy.
We are out of time.
You will be caught in a web.
Give him the statement.
Pray for me.
Now, Dan, I suppose, in terms of Brian Moore, it's always a test of faith, with his work. And it certainly tested my faith to believe that Michael Caine was French.
Sean Connery, in The Untouchables.
Yeah, Sean Connery has been Irish or Spanish, even in Highlander. So, it can happen. But, it's quite an extraordinary film in its own right. He was a great writer of thrillers. That's what we should say about kind of Brian Moore and his film work. He could keep you on the edge of your seat.
The statement that Tilda Swinton, Jeremy Northam, Alan Bates, Charlotte Rampling, Kieran Hines from here, Jimmy Green from here, John Neville are all in that film. It's an extraordinary cast, magnificent number. It cost something like 27 million to make, and bafflingly only made $1.5 million at the box office. So again, I think maybe ahead of his time, you know, people weren't kind of ready for that, or it wasn't something that appealed to them because it was a difficult subject. Michael Caine, very believable, but the brilliant thing about Moore is that even though this guy is a monster, there is a certain empathy because he's an older man and he regrets what he did to the extent he has a huge religious faith, and he puts his trust in people that he thinks you know, are going to look after him. And like he betrayed other people, he is ultimately betrayed as well. And again, the vast themes that Moore is discussing and discovering and handling within his work, it's quite staggering, the level of brilliance. He was nominated for the Booker Prize on 3 occasions. He didn't win it, but that doesn't matter. He was there. He deserved it. It's like being Oscar nominated, you know?
Yeah.
3.
Now, Dan, the question that we started with was, what is the best Moore film? Now, there are things that we haven't been able to look at just purely in terms of time. I mean, obviously, things like The Temptation of Eileen Hughes, which is a very compelling TV drama. Cold Heaven, a supernatural thriller directed by Nicholas Roeg, starring his wife, Teresa Russell, which is a remarkable piece of work.
Yeah, I think the least successful film, a much better book.
Yeah, much better book. But I mean, an extraordinary piece of work. I mean, like, you don't know whether to laugh or cry when you're watching it. Mm-hmm. But Dan, for you, out of the films that we've spoken about and the films that you have watched, like, you know, kind of again recently, which do you think is your favorite, if not the best, Moore film?
I think Black Robe has got to be up there as the most ambitious kind of work that he did on film for me. I mean, I love the statement just because Michael Caine's in it, and it's a well-made thriller and it's great fun. It's a bit like the Da Vinci Code almost, you know. But I think Black Robe is such an ambitious piece of work, being filmed in the depths of winter, been filmed on location. The attempt at using all the languages to tackle the themes of the abuse of native Indigenous people. I think, to me, it's terrific. And the one film that I think he should have made was The Emperor of Ice Cream.
Okay, so that is the book that you would like to see adapted. Now, people are going to put stuff into the chat room here. So if you, into the chat box there, if you have a film that you think is your favorite from the work of Brian Moore, please mention it. It'd be great to hear. I mean, going back to Dan, that second question, which is, which of his books would you like to see adapted? I mean, part of me would love to see Judith Hearne remade in Belfast, or I actually wish it had been made in the 1950s in black and white in Belfast. It would have been like amazing. But I have to agree with you. It has to be The Emperor of Ice Cream. And again, that is a Belfast novel, very much about this dull, dead town. And then the Second World War comes to it. And you've got a bit of Adrian Mole, you've got a bit of Dad's Army. And then all of a sudden the Blitz happens, and there's an extraordinary kind of sequence in that. And you can see the film. And then the lead character goes to work in the morgue, and it's very sobering. You've got this amazing kind of emotional journey of this young man, like a great coming-of-age film. And we know coming-of-age stories work wonderfully well in the cinema. So in terms of our chat box, Scott, can we see what some of the comments are, if that's possible, please?
Sorry, I've just taken myself off mute there. I think most of the comments have been sent to everyone, so Brian, you should be able to see them there. Got some votes for Catholics. The Revolution script. Other people agreeing with you on the Lonely Passion of Judith Hearne.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you can see those, comments there. Yeah.
I can see that. I mean, Dan, why do you think that Brian Moore's work has not been adapted since 2003? I mean, there are, as you say, there are Booker Prize nominated novels here that haven't been adapted. You know, I was thinking of something like The Doctor's Wife, say, for example, which is a kind of menage en trois. You could see that as a TV drama or a film. I mean, why has Brian Moore's work, you know, stopped being seen on the cinema, do you think?
I think it's because we're not smart enough. We're not clever enough to realize that it's out there. I think that there's nobody fighting his case because he was kind of rough on Belfast with some of his work with Fergus and with Emperor of Ice Cream to an extent, and also because he had that nomadic life. Or apparent nomadic life, where he's if you look him up, he's Northern Irish Canadian, Hollywood screenwriter. He's not kind of identified with a single place, and I think he kind of he fell between the cracks in the recognition stakes when it comes to here, because he wasn't an effusive personality who was all over the place, and you would see him regularly. So I think it's a lot of different things combine to kind of let him slip away. And I think it's things like this are vital, and it should bring him back into public recognition. I mean, if people read his biography, I mean, the books stand alone as they do. Yeah. But if you read his biographies, you'll discover things like he was hit by a motorboat and had an accident. And that's one of the things that features in Cold Heaven. He was struck in the head, that he was a proofwriter, Ginger Coffey, that he was in the ARP, Emperor of Ice Cream, that he grew up with 6 sisters and mother and aunts and various housemaids who looked out for him. So he empathizes with women, to an extent that a lot of men are not really capable of. So that there are so many good strengths in him, but I think we just haven't recognized and fought his case hard enough.
Yeah, and I think what you say is right. I think film is a director's medium, and for any writer working in cinema, you're only as good as the director who's making your film. And like Brian was quite unlucky, maybe Alfred Hitchcock was not quite at the top of his game, or Nicholas Roeg wasn't, or and he just kind of didn't get the luck to hit the right director with the right project at the right time. Like there was a time when John Huston was going to direct Judith Hearne starring Katharine Hepburn. I mean, can you imagine? Like that would have been absolutely glorious, and set in Belfast, and that just would have been the greatest film we never made, Dan.
Yes, that's true. That's very true.
But I mean, I think on the centenary of his birth, we remember Brian as obviously a brilliant storyteller on the page and on the screen, and whatever work you come to, there's always something fascinating and gripping in everything that he does. And we should all, read and watch his work and be very proud of him.
Yep, I second that. And I think that's probably a good place to park the car.
Well, listen, everyone, thank you so much for, sorry for the technical difficulties along the way, but that is the nature of our lives now, online. Isn't that right, Dan?
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
Dan and I are actually next to each other in separate rooms, but we're just pretending to be online.
We have fans in Mailbu.
Let's all go and live in Mailbu. But thank you all very much for listening, and happy watching of movies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you.
I'd just like to thank Brian and Dan for joining us this evening. I'd like to thank all the rest of you who registered and came along. We can't run these events without your support. So once you're finished here, and once you've watched your favorite film that we've mentioned tonight, if you head over to linenhall.com, you can view our upcoming program of events, find out about how to become a member of the library, and enjoy the rest of your evening. And we'll see you at another event soon. Thank you.